I confess that when I accepted Lady Pemberton's invitation to her charity soiree that foggy October evening, I anticipated nothing more stimulating than tepid conversation about the weather and perhaps an overpriced glass of indifferent champagne. How wrong I was to underestimate the capacity of London society to provide drama when one least expects it. Indeed, by the time the grandfather clock in Lady Pemberton's drawing-room chimed 10:30, I found myself witness to a mystery that would have intrigued even my friend Hercule Poirot, though at that moment I had no notion that within the hour I would be summoning him from his comfortable flat in Whitehaven Mansions. Lady Pemberton's residence at number 47 Belgrave Square was thrown open that evening in aid of the Children's Hospital Fund, and the cream of London society had responded with their customary mixture of genuine philanthropy and social obligation. The lady herself, a handsome widow of perhaps 50 years with silver hair and intelligent grey eyes, moved among her guests with the practiced grace of one born to such gatherings. She wore a gown of deep burgundy silk that complemented admirably the centerpiece of the evening's display, a jade bracelet of extraordinary beauty that had been donated anonymously for auction to benefit the hospital. The bracelet itself was a marvel of ancient craftsmanship, carved from a single piece of imperial jade in the form of a coiled serpent, its surface so perfectly polished that it seemed to glow within a light. 2 small diamonds served as the creature's eyes, and the clasp was fashioned as the serpent's mouth, designed to bite its own tail in the eternal symbol of eternity. It rested in a place of honor upon a velvet cushion in Lady Pemberton's morning room, where guests could admire it before the evening's auction. Among those guests, I noted several familiar faces from my club and various social functions. Sir Reginald Blackwood, a distinguished gentleman in his 60s whose recent financial reversals were whispered about in certain circles, examined the bracelet with the intense interest of a connoisseur, or perhaps a man calculating its worth. His wife, Lady Blackwood, a nervous creature with darting eyes and hands that fluttered constantly at her throat, seemed more interested in watching her husband than in viewing the jewelry. Young Mr. Timothy Ashford, heir to a shipping fortune but notorious for his gambling debts, lingered near the display with studied casualness, though I observed him glance repeatedly toward the bracelet when he thought himself unobserved. Miss Eleanor Hartwell, Lady Pemberton's niece and companion, moved efficiently through the gathering, ensuring guests comfort with the quiet competence of one accustomed to managing such affairs. She was a woman of perhaps 30, unremarkable in appearance but possessed of keen intelligence that showed in her alert brown eyes. Dr. Marcus Thornley, the family physician, who had attended Lady Pemberton's late husband during his final illness, stood somewhat apart from the other guests, his professional manner intact even in social circumstances. I had met him previously and found him to be a man of rigid propriety, though tonight he seemed unusually preoccupied, checking his pocket watch frequently and casting glances toward the door as if expecting someone. The final member of our small gathering was Mrs. Victoria Mansfield, a widow of more recent vintage whose husband's death had left her in straitened circumstances despite her efforts to maintain appearances. She was an elegant woman still, with auburn hair and green eyes, but there was something desperate in the way she admired the bracelet, a hunger that went beyond mere aesthetic appreciation. As the evening progressed, Lady Pemberton announced that the auction would commence at precisely 10 o'clock and invited her guests to take one final look at the jade serpent before bidding began. It was then, as we gathered in the morning room, that she made a discovery that transformed our pleasant social evening into something far more sinister. The velvet cushion was empty. The jade bracelet had vanished as completely as if it had never existed. For a moment, the silence was absolute. Lady Pemberton stared at the vacant cushion with an expression of such profound shock that I feared she might faint. Then, with admirable composure, she straightened her shoulders and addressed her guests in a voice that trembled only slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "it appears we have a rather serious problem. The bracelet has been taken, and as you are all aware, No one has left the house since 8 o'clock when the doors were locked for security purposes. I must ask that everyone remain calm while we determine what has occurred." The reaction was immediate and varied. Sir Reginald blustered about the impossibility of such a thing, while his wife grew even more pale and agitated. Mr. Ashford's face flushed crimson, and he began to protest his innocence before anyone had accused him of anything. Miss Hartwell moved quickly to her aunt's side, her efficient manner intact despite the circumstances. Dr. Thornley stepped forward with professional authority, suggesting that perhaps the bracelet had simply been moved for safekeeping, though his suggestion lacked conviction. Mrs. Mansfield said nothing at all, but I observed that her hands were trembling as she clutched her evening bag. "I shall telephone the police immediately," Lady Pemberton announced, but even as she spoke, I found myself thinking of my friend Poirot and his remarkable ability to see through the tangles of human deception to the truth beneath. Here was a classic locked-room mystery, with a small group of suspects, each of whom had both opportunity and, I suspected, motive. As Lady Pemberton moved toward the telephone, I made a decision that would prove more consequential than I could have imagined. "Lady Pemberton," I said, stepping forward, "before you summon the official police, might I suggest consulting a private detective of my acquaintance? Hercule Poirot has an extraordinary talent for such puzzles, and his discretion is absolute." She paused, her hand on the telephone, and looked at me with those intelligent grey eyes. "You believe this requires such expertise, Captain Hastings?" "I fear it may," I replied, glancing around at the assembled company. "The circumstances are most unusual, and Mr. Poirot has solved cases that baffled Scotland Yard itself." Lady Pemberton nodded slowly. "Very well. Please ask your friend to come at once. Until he arrives, I must insist that no one leave the premises." As I moved toward the telephone to summon Poirot, I could not help but notice the expressions on the faces around me. Fear, guilt, calculation, and something else, a kind of desperate hope that perhaps this Belgian detective might succeed where conventional investigation would fail. Little did any of us know that before the night was over, Hercule Poirot would not only recover the Jade Bracelet, but expose secrets that would shake the very foundations of our small gathering. The game, as my friend would say, was afoot. The 20 minutes that elapsed between my telephone call to Poirot and his arrival seemed to stretch endlessly, filled with a tension that grew more palpable with each passing moment. Lady Pemberton, having secured the house and instructed her butler Graves to ensure no one could enter or leave, attempted to maintain the facade of gracious hostess, but the strain showed clearly in the tight lines around her eyes and the way her hands trembled slightly as she arranged and rearranged the flowers on a side table. The transformation of her elegant drawing-room from a place of charitable gathering to a prison of suspicion was complete, and each of her guests seemed to retreat into their own private world of anxiety and calculation. Sir Reginald Blackwood had abandoned his initial bluster and now stood near the fireplace, his usually florid complexion pale as he stared into the flames. His recent financial difficulties were well known in our circle, and I could not help but notice how his eyes occasionally drifted toward the door of the sealed morning room, as if calculating what the Jade Bracelet might have meant to his desperate circumstances. Lady Blackwood had withdrawn to a corner chair, clutching her evening bag with white knuckles, her nervous disposition now elevated to near panic. She started at every sound, every movement, and I observed that she seemed more frightened of her husband's reaction than of the theft itself. Young Timothy Ashford made a show of examining the books on Lady Pemberton's shelves, but his restless energy betrayed his studied nonchalance. His gambling debts were notorious, and the way he fingered his borrowed cigarette case suggested a man accustomed to living beyond his means. Mrs. Victoria Mansfield sat in elegant silence, her green eyes haunted by something deeper than mere shock at the evening's events. Her straitened circumstances since her husband's death were an open secret, and the desperate way she had admired the bracelet earlier now took on a more sinister significance. Miss Eleanor Hartwell moved efficiently among the guests, offering refreshments and quiet reassurances. But I noticed her keen intelligence at work, observing each person with the calculating gaze of one who understood that her comfortable position depended entirely on her aunt's continued prosperity and reputation. Dr. Thornley maintained his professional composure, but his earlier preoccupation with his pocket watch had not escaped my notice, and I wondered what appointment could be so pressing as to distract him even now. It was precisely at 10:30 that the doorbell rang, and Graves admitted the unmistakable figure of Hercule Poirot. Despite the late hour and foggy weather, he appeared immaculate as always, his patent leather shoes gleaming, his moustache waxed to perfection, and those remarkable green eyes, already taking in every detail of the scene before him. Lady Pemberton approached him with visible relief, and I performed the necessary introductions with a sense that we were about to witness something extraordinary. "Madame?" Poirot said, taking Lady Pemberton's hand with his characteristic slight bow. "Captain Hastings has explained the situation, but I should be grateful if you would recount the discovery of this theft in your own words." As she spoke, Poirot listened with that peculiar stillness that indicated his complete attention, occasionally interjecting with questions that seemed trivial, but which I knew from experience would prove significant. When she mentioned the anonymous donation of the bracelet, his eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly, and he requested to see the accompanying note. "Most interesting," he murmured as he examined the brief message through his magnifying glass. "The paper, it is of excellent quality, and the hand that wrote it belongs to someone of education and refinement. Yet there is something curious about the formation of certain letters that suggests perhaps the writer was not entirely at ease." He returned the note to Lady Pemberton and requested to examine the scene of the crime. The morning room, with its cream and gold decor and the forlorn empty cushion, seemed to speak to Poirot in ways that escaped the rest of us. He approached the display table with the reverence of a priest approaching an altar, his keen eyes taking in every detail of the arrangement, the surrounding furniture, and the room's entrances. He produced his magnifying glass and examined the velvet cushion minutely, then the table surface, and finally the floor around the display. "The thief, he was most careful," Poirot observed quietly to me. "Yet even the most careful criminal cannot avoid leaving some trace of his presence. See here, Hastings, this faint mark upon the table's edge, and here, the slightest disturbance in the carpet's nap. Someone stood here for some time, long enough to leave these subtle signs." He straightened and surveyed the assembled company with those penetrating green eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, I must now ask each of you to account for your movements during the crucial period between 9:30 and 10 o'clock this evening. But first, I should like to understand something of your individual connections to this remarkable piece of jewelry. For I suspect that this jade serpent has revealed more than its beauty tonight. It has exposed secrets that some among you believed safely hidden." The reaction was immediate and telling. Sir Reginald's face flushed crimson, Lady Blackwood appeared ready to faint, and young Ashford's hand moved instinctively to his throat as if his collar had suddenly become too tight. Mrs. Mansfield pressed her lips together in a thin line, while Miss Hartwell's composure remained intact, though I detected a new wariness in her intelligent eyes. Dr. Thornley cleared his throat professionally, but even his practiced calm seemed somewhat strained. "Come," Poirot continued with quiet authority, "let us proceed systematically. Lady Pemberton has kindly offered the use of her study for private conversations. I shall speak with each of you in turn, and I trust that complete honesty will serve us all better than any attempt at concealment. For the truth, mes amis, has a way of revealing itself, whether we assist it or not." Lady Pemberton's study, with its mahogany paneling and leather-bound volumes, provided the perfect setting for Poirot's methodical examination of each suspect. He had arranged 2 chairs facing each other near the massive desk, while I positioned myself discreetly to one side with my notebook. The Belgian detective's green eyes surveyed the room with satisfaction, and he straightened a slightly askew paperweight before settling into his chair with characteristic precision. "We shall proceed systematically, mes amis," he announced to the assembled company in the drawing room, "and I trust that complete honesty will serve us all better than any attempt at concealment." Sir Reginald Blackwood entered first, his earlier bluster now replaced by a nervous energy that he attempted to mask with aristocratic dignity. Poirot's opening question seemed deceptively simple, focusing on Sir Reginald's obvious expertise in Oriental antiquities. "The Jade Bracelet, it impressed you greatly this evening, n'est-ce pas?" Poirot inquired gently. Sir Reginald's response revealed extensive knowledge of Imperial Jade and Han Dynasty craftsmanship, but when pressed about his recent financial difficulties, his composure cracked visibly. He admitted to considering dealing in Oriental art as a means of recovering losses from a failed Burmese mining venture, though he vehemently denied any criminal intent. His alibi placed him in the library between 9:30 and 10 o'clock, claiming to have been reading Debrett's Peerage, though he hastily corrected himself when Poirot's eyebrows rose questioningly. Lady Blackwood followed, trembling like a leaf in autumn wind. Her terror stemmed not from personal guilt, but from desperate fear that her husband's circumstances might have driven him to theft. Through her tears, she revealed observing Sir Reginald's unusual preoccupation with the bracelet and mysterious telephone calls in recent days. Her own movements during the crucial period were vague, spent mostly in the cloakroom attending to a troublesome brooch clasp, though she mentioned receiving sal volatile from Dr. Thornley near the stairs when the mantel clock struck 10:15. Young Timothy Ashford attempted nonchalance but achieved only transparent anxiety. His gambling debts were indeed crushing, but Poirot's probing revealed a more complex motivation involving a secret romance with a young woman whose father would never approve of an impoverished suitor. Ashford claimed to have been in the conservatory, smoking at 20 minutes to 10, where he observed a lady in a dark wrap passing the morning-room door, possibly Mrs. Mansfield. His desperation was palpable, yet something in his manner suggested the guilt of circumstance rather than criminal action. Mrs. Victoria Mansfield entered with dignity intact, despite her obvious emotional fragility. Her husband's death had left her not merely in reduced circumstances, but facing active creditors, pressing for payment of debts she had never fully understood. She admitted frankly to calculating the bracelet's probable value, but insisted that consideration and action were entirely different matters. Her alibi was weak, placing her by the terrace doors seeking air from the oppressive fog, though she mentioned hearing low voices on the stair, possibly Sir Reginald and Miss Hartwell in conversation. Miss Eleanor Hartwell presented herself with characteristic efficiency, producing a notebook documenting her activities, arranging auction lots, and seating. Her position as Lady Pemberton's companion made her acutely aware of how any scandal might affect her own security. She had closed the morning-room door 20 minutes to 10, noting that several gentlemen were hovering nearby and admitted suggesting that the bracelet remained visible to encourage generous bidding. Her intelligence was evident, but Poirot seemed to detect something beneath her composed exterior that warranted further consideration. Dr. Thornley maintained professional calm throughout his interview, though his earlier preoccupation with his pocket watch remained unexplained beyond vague references to a consumptive patient requiring attention. His medical expertise allowed him to observe that the bracelet showed a weakness near the clasp, and he provided the specific detail that he had been at the telephone alcove at 9:40, calling Bedford 74431. His precision impressed Poirot, yet something in the doctor's manner suggested concealment of matters unrelated to the theft itself. After the interviews concluded, Poirot requested to examine the morning-room once more. He approached the empty velvet cushion with reverence, producing his magnifying glass to study faint marks on the table's edge and subtle disturbances in the carpet's nap. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured. "Someone stood here for considerable time, long enough to leave these traces." The thief did not snatch hastily but paused to admire, suggesting vanity even in crime. He detected the ghost of violet scent at the door handle, along with face powder residue, and noted that the stiff window casement could not have provided escape. Most significantly, he observed that reaching the bracelet required stepping fully into the room, making concealment impossible for anyone watching from the doorway. Returning to the study, Poirot steepled his fingers in contemplation. Each suspect possesses both motive and opportunity, mon ami, yet their manner suggests the truth lies deeper than mere financial desperation. Note how alibis are either precise to the minute or deliberately vague, how witnesses are borrowed or avoided, and how knowledge is offered that could either condemn or exonerate. The Jade Serpent has indeed revealed more than its beauty tonight, exposing secrets that some believed safely hidden. But which secret drove someone to theft, and which merely creates the appearance of guilt? That, Hastings, is what we must now determine. The interviews had concluded, but Poirot's expression suggested that the real work was only beginning. He sat in contemplative silence for several minutes, his green eyes fixed on some invisible pattern that only he could perceive, while I reviewed my hastily scribbled notes and attempted to make sense of the contradictory statements we had heard. When he finally spoke, it was with the quiet authority that I had learned to recognize as the prelude to his most penetrating observations. "Tell me, Hastings," he began, his fingers steepled before him, "what strikes you most forcibly about the testimonies we have just heard?" I confessed that the alibis seemed frustratingly vague, with everyone claiming to be elsewhere during the crucial moments, yet no one able to provide definitive proof of their whereabouts. Poirot nodded slowly, but his expression suggested that I had missed something more fundamental. "Précisément, mon ami, but consider this curious fact. Not one of our suspects has asked the obvious question that any innocent person would naturally pose. They speak of their movements, their financial difficulties, their observations of others, but none has inquired how the thief could have known that the bracelet would be unguarded at that precise moment, or why they chose to act during the narrow window between Lady Pemberton's final inspection and the announced auction time." He rose and began his characteristic pacing, hands clasped behind his back. "The theft was not opportunistic, Hastings. It required specific knowledge of Lady Pemberton's habits, the household routine, and the evening schedule. This suggests either intimate familiarity with the house and its mistress, or information obtained through careful observation and planning." Pausing at the window, he gazed into the fog-shrouded square. "Now, let us consider the physical evidence. The Jade Serpent was not small, weighing perhaps 4 ounces, and measuring 6 inches in length. It could not be concealed in a gentleman's evening clothes without creating a noticeable bulge, nor could a lady hide it easily in her evening bag without considerable preparation. Yet none of our suspects shows any sign of such concealment, and Graves assures us that no one has left the premises. This observation troubled me greatly, for it seemed to suggest that the bracelet remained somewhere within the house. Poirot seemed to read my thoughts, for he smiled with that peculiar satisfaction that indicated his mind was working several steps ahead of mine. "But there is something else that puzzles Hercule Poirot greatly," he continued, returning to his chair. "During our interviews, I observed each suspect's reaction, not merely to direct questions, but to indirect references to the bracelet itself. Sir Reginald's knowledge of jade was extensive, almost scholarly, yet when I mentioned the serpent's symbolic significance, his response was oddly evasive. His claim of reading Debrett's peerage was hastily corrected when I raised my eyebrows, questioningly. He began counting on his fingers as he continued his analysis. Lady Blackwood's terror seemed genuine, but her fear focused more on her husband's potential guilt than on the crime itself. Young Ashford's observation of Mrs. Mansfield passing the morning room was suspiciously precise, yet he failed to mention seeing Miss Hartwell, who explicitly stated she was closing the door at that exact time. The most intriguing observation, however, concerned Dr. Thornley. The good doctor's medical precision served him well in providing specific times and locations, yet his telephone call at 9:40 remains unexplained. When I had Graves inquire with the exchange, we discovered something most illuminating. He paused dramatically before continuing. The call was placed to Bedford 7431, which the operator informed us belongs to R.A. Felton and Sons, dealers in Oriental art, in Vigo Street. The conversation lasted merely 20 seconds, with someone called Mr. Merton answering and saying only, "Call back in the morning," before the line was disconnected. This revelation sent a visible tremor through our assembled suspects when Poirot announced it to the drawing room. Sir Reginald's face flushed crimson, while Dr. Thornley maintained his professional composure, though I detected a new tension in his manner. "It is not theft only, Hastings," Poirot murmured to me as we observed their reactions. "It is a conversation begun and postponed. But why would our respectable doctor be calling Oriental art dealers at such a crucial moment in our evening's events?" He moved to examine the morning room once more, this time focusing on details that had escaped earlier notice. With his magnifying glass, he studied faint marks on the table's edge and noted the ghost of violet scent lingering near the door handle. Someone stood here for considerable time, long enough to leave these traces. The thief did not snatch hastily, but paused to admire, suggesting vanity even in crime. Returning to face our suspects, Poirot's manner became more direct. "The anonymous donation of this jade serpent raises questions that none of you have thought to ask. Who would possess such a valuable piece and choose to donate it anonymously to charity? What circumstances would motivate such generosity, while simultaneously requiring secrecy?" Lady Pemberton's reaction was immediate and telling. A flush rose in her cheeks, and her hands moved nervously to adjust her necklace. Her denial was too quick, too emphatic, and I could see that Poirot had noted her response with considerable interest. "We are not yet at the truth," Poirot announced to the assembled company, "but we approach the threshold. The bracelet has not left Belgrave Square, which means it is either still in the possession of our thief or has been hidden somewhere within these walls. Tomorrow, I believe, will bring us much closer to understanding not only who took the jade serpent, but why they felt compelled to do so. The silence that followed was heavy as the fog pressing upon the windows, each suspect now acutely aware that Hercule Poirot saw far more than any of them had imagined. Dawn arrived grudgingly at Belgrave Square, the fog lifting to reveal a world made sharp and unforgiving by the clear morning light that seemed to expose every secret our little gathering had attempted to conceal during the long night. Inspector Japp's arrival shortly after 8 o'clock brought with it the methodical efficiency of Scotland Yard, his brisk manner and practical approach providing a marked contrast to Poirot's more psychological methods of investigation. Lady Pemberton, looking considerably more drawn than she had the previous evening, greeted the inspector with visible relief, though I detected an underlying anxiety that suggested she understood how the involvement of official police would transform her elegant home into something resembling a crime scene. "Well, Poirot," Japp announced with his characteristic directness, "seems we have a straightforward case of theft among the upper classes. My money's on someone with obvious financial troubles and clear opportunity." His keen eyes surveyed our assembled suspects with the practiced assessment of a man who had seen too many drawing-room crimes to be impressed by aristocratic protestations of innocence. The morning's first significant development came when Japp's sergeant, conducting a systematic search of the areas where guests had congregated the previous evening, made a discovery that seemed to resolve the mystery with devastating finality. From within the ornate Chinese vase that stood near the fireplace, precisely where Sir Reginald Blackwood had positioned himself for much of the evening, the sergeant extracted a small wooden box of unmistakably oriental design, its dark surface inlaid with mother-of-pearl in intricate patterns that spoke of considerable value and exotic origins. Sir Reginald's reaction was immediate and telling. The color drained from his face as if someone had opened a valve, and his usual aristocratic composure crumbled visibly as Japp examined the box with professional interest. "Sir Reginald," the inspector stated with the flat authority of established fact, "this appears to be rather distinctive. Does it belong to you?" The denial came too quickly, too emphatically, accompanied by the kind of stammering protest that convinces no one, least of all an experienced police officer who had heard similar protestations countless times before. When Japp opened the box, the contents provided what appeared to be conclusive proof of guilt. Nestled on faded crimson velvet lay a fragment of imperial jade, perfectly carved and unmistakably part of a larger serpentine form. The piece was clearly identifiable as having been broken from the missing bracelet, its surface bearing the same lustrous quality and distinctive green coloration that had made the complete piece so remarkable. The evidence seemed overwhelming in its clarity. Sir Reginald's financial difficulties, his obvious expertise in Oriental antiquities, his nervous behavior during questioning, and now this damning physical proof discovered in the exact location where he had stood throughout the crucial period, every element combined to create a picture of guilt that satisfied even Japp's practical mind. "Well, Sir Reginald," the inspector declared with evident satisfaction, "it appears we have our thief. This fragment, found precisely where you positioned yourself last evening, leaves little room for reasonable doubt." Lady Blackwood's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. She collapsed into the nearest chair, her nervous disposition completely overwhelmed by the catastrophe that had befallen her husband. Her tears were genuine, her protests desperate, but they carried no conviction against the weight of physical evidence that seemed to speak with irrefutable authority. The other suspects displayed reactions that ranged from relief to satisfaction. Young Ashford's earlier agitation evaporated as suspicion focused elsewhere. Mrs. Mansfield's tense shoulders relaxed perceptibly, and even Miss Hartwell allowed herself a small smile of vindication. The oppressive atmosphere of universal suspicion that had dominated our gathering began to lift, replaced by the collective sense that justice was about to be served. Throughout this dramatic revelation, Poirot remained conspicuously silent. He observed Japp's triumphant efficiency, studied Sir Reginald's desperate denials, and examined the wooden box with that peculiar intensity that indicated his little grey cells were working at maximum capacity. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of gentle disagreement that I had learned to recognize as the prelude to uncomfortable truth. "Inspector," he said quietly, "the solution. It is perhaps too convenient, too perfectly arranged. Consider how the evidence presents itself. The obvious suspect, the obvious hiding place, the obvious motive. It lacks the complexity that usually accompanies genuine criminal behavior." Japp's response was predictably dismissive, focused as he was on the tangible proof before him rather than Poirot's psychological theories. As Sir Reginald was led away in handcuffs, protesting his innocence with increasing desperation, Poirot drew me aside with an expression that combined satisfaction with concern. "The case appears solved, mon ami, but appearances, they can be most deceiving. Someone has provided us with exactly the solution they wish us to accept, complete with physical evidence that cannot be disputed. But the mind that conceived this crime is far more sophisticated than these crude arrangements suggest." His green eyes surveyed the remaining suspects with renewed interest, and I realized that rather than concluding our investigation, the morning's developments had merely completed the first movement of a far more complex symphony. The Jade Serpent had indeed revealed secrets, but not the ones we had been intended to discover. The departure of Inspector Japp with Sir Reginald in custody should have brought relief to Lady Pemberton's drawing-room, yet the atmosphere remained thick with unresolved tension. Poirot had requested to remain another day, ostensibly to gather evidence for Sir Reginald's defense, but I recognized the familiar gleam in his green eyes that indicated his little grey cells were working at maximum capacity. The other guests, while visibly relieved that suspicion had shifted away from them, seemed unable to fully relax in the Belgian detective's continued presence. Lady Pemberton ordered coffee and light refreshments, and Poirot accepted with characteristic politeness, though I noticed how carefully he observed each person's behavior during this mundane ritual. Young Ashford's hand trembled slightly as he lifted his cup, Mrs. Mansfield declined sugar, then immediately requested it, and Miss Hartwell's usual efficiency seemed forced as she assisted her aunt. Dr. Thornley maintained his professional composure, but his earlier telephone call to the Oriental art dealers remained unexplained, creating an undercurrent of unease that Poirot seemed determined to explore. "The evidence against Sir Reginald appears conclusive," Poirot observed conversationally, producing his magnifying glass to examine the jade fragment once more. "Yet something troubles me greatly about this piece. The surface, it lacks the perfect polish of the original bracelet. Where the serpent should be silk smooth, this fragment shows the faintest marks of modern cutting tools." The reaction was immediate and telling. Lady Pemberton's hand moved instinctively to her throat. Dr. Thornley's gaze sharpened with professional interest, and Mrs. Mansfield set down her cup with unnecessary force. Miss Hartwell maintained her composure, but I detected a new wariness in her intelligent eyes. "Someone," Poirot continued with deceptive casualness, "has been most theatrical in arranging evidence. The fragment was placed in that Chinese vase not by a desperate thief, but by someone who understood exactly how the police would interpret such a discovery." He rose and moved to the morning room, where he knelt to examine the carpet near the display table with meticulous care. "Observe, Hastings, these faint impressions in the pile. Someone stood here for considerable time, but the pattern suggests not theft, but contemplation. The true thief admired the bracelet before taking it, revealing vanity even in crime." More significantly, his examination of the door handle revealed traces of face powder and the lingering ghost of violet perfume, evidence that pointed unmistakably toward female involvement. When he announced this discovery, the effect was electric. Lady Blackwood's nervous protests that she used rose sachets, not violet, seemed almost desperate, while Mrs. Mansfield's green eyes showed something that might have been fear. Dr. Thornley finally broke under Poirot's gentle but persistent questioning about his telephone call. "If you must know," he admitted reluctantly, "I was concerned about the bracelet's provenance. I recognized it from a catalogue of questionable Oriental pieces that circulates among reputable dealers. My call was an attempt to verify its legitimacy before the auction proceeded." This revelation cast the entire evening in a new light. If the bracelet's origins were indeed questionable, then its disappearance might represent something far more complex than simple theft. Poirot's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as another piece of the puzzle fell into place. "But there is more, n'est-ce pas, Doctor?" Poirot pressed gently. "Your concern was not merely professional, but personal. You feared that any scandal might affect someone for whom you cared deeply." The doctor's admission was reluctant but complete. He had been treating Lady Pemberton for episodes of confusion and memory loss, symptoms she was desperately attempting to conceal from her social circle. This medical revelation provided crucial context for understanding how she might have come to possess the bracelet without clear recollection of its origins. As the afternoon progressed, Poirot employed increasingly subtle psychological pressure on each suspect. He arranged for Graves to announce loudly that a jeweler with X-ray equipment awaited below, capable of examining any hidden jewelry. The announcement was pure theater, but its effect was immediate. Mrs. Mansfield flinched visibly, Miss Hartwell's composure wavered, and even the absent Lady Blackwood could be heard protesting from the hallway that such scientific methods were surely unnecessary. "The thief," Poirot announced to the assembled company, "is not driven by simple greed, but by a more complex mixture of pride, fear, and desperation. They stood too long admiring their prize, revealing vanity, then contrived an elaborate deception to mislead the authorities. But pride leaves traces, and fear creates patterns that the trained eye can detect." He paused significantly, allowing his words to settle over the gathering like morning fog. "Sir Reginald sits in custody because someone wished him to appear guilty, but the true criminal remains among us, believing themselves safe behind their careful deceptions." As evening approached, Poirot requested permission to arrange another gathering after dark. "Tomorrow," he promised Lady Pemberton. "We shall see justice properly served. The Jade Serpent has indeed revealed secrets, but not the ones we were intended to discover." The psychological game had begun in earnest, and I could sense that our true adversary was finally beginning to understand the formidable nature of their opponent. The second evening at Belgrave Square descended with the weight of unresolved mysteries pressing upon every occupant of Lady Pemberton's once elegant home. Poirot had spent the afternoon in what appeared to be casual conversation, but I recognized his technique of applying psychological pressure with surgical precision. He mentioned casually the remarkable accuracy of modern forensic photography in detecting fingerprints on jade surfaces, observed how certain perfumes retained their distinctive scent for days on fabric, and discussed with apparent academic interest the methods used by contemporary forgers to age new jade artifacts. Each comment was delivered with characteristic courtesy, yet I could observe their cumulative effect in the increasingly strained expressions of our remaining suspects. Lady Pemberton had grown visibly more fragile throughout the day, her earlier composure giving way to periods of confusion that Dr. Thornley observed with professional concern. The other suspects arranged themselves in the drawing room with careful positioning, each maintaining distance while attempting normalcy. Mrs. Mansfield had changed her gown and applied different perfume, though the faint trace of violet still lingered about her person. Miss Hartwell maintained her efficient facade while managing correspondence, but her usual competence seemed forced. Young Ashford chain-smoked near the window, his earlier relief at Sir Reginald's arrest now replaced by growing unease as Poirot's investigation continued. The evening's first significant development came when Graves announced Inspector Japp's unexpected return. The inspector's news transformed our gathering from tense waiting into something approaching crisis. Sir Reginald Blackwood had collapsed in his cell from the strain of false imprisonment and was now hospitalized in serious condition. Lady Blackwood, overwhelmed by her husband's circumstances, was under medical supervision. The weight of unjust accusation had nearly claimed 2 lives, lending moral urgency to Poirot's investigation that transcended the recovery of stolen jewelry. "The situation has become grave indeed," Poirot announced to the assembled company, his gentle manner replaced by stern authority. "An innocent man lies near death because someone among us has allowed him to bear consequences of their crimes. This cannot continue." The effect was immediate and varied. Mrs. Mansfield's face went ashen, Miss Hartwell's pen trembled, creating an ink blot, and Dr. Thornley stepped forward, offering professional assistance while clearly distressed himself. Poirot moved to the fireplace, where he had arranged several items with characteristic precision: his magnifying glass, a jeweler's loupe, and most significantly, a photograph of the jade bracelet taken from multiple angles. "The evidence speaks with increasing clarity," he announced. The thief possessed intimate knowledge of this house, its routines, and Lady Pemberton's habits. They knew precisely when the bracelet would be unguarded, and understood how to manipulate the subsequent investigation. He studied the photograph through his magnifying glass, but they made one crucial error. The fragment found in the Chinese vase was indeed cut from the original bracelet, but not by accident or desperation. It was removed deliberately, with precision tools, to create evidence against Sir Reginald. The surface marks, I observed, were not from hasty theft, but from careful craftsmanship designed to mislead. Dr. Thornley's professional curiosity overcame discretion. "You suggest someone deliberately damaged a priceless artifact to create false evidence? The skill required would be considerable." Poirot nodded approvingly. "Précisément, Doctor. Someone with access to precision instruments, steady hands, and detailed knowledge of Jade's properties. Someone who could work quickly and quietly, leaving minimal trace." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Each person began considering who among their number possessed such specialized knowledge and equipment. Mrs. Mansfield's late husband had been a collector of Oriental art, Miss Hartwell managed Lady Pemberton's extensive decorative collection, and Dr. Thornley possessed medical instruments and steady hands required for delicate work, But there is more. Poirot continued, producing a small envelope. This morning, while examining Lady Pemberton's correspondence, I discovered something illuminating. A letter from Messrs. Hartley and Sons, Oriental art appraisers, dated 1 week ago, confirming authentication of a jade serpent bracelet and providing detailed valuation. The effect was electric. Miss Hartwell's composure cracked visibly. Mrs. Mansfield gripped her chair arms until knuckles showed white, and Dr. Thornley's professional mask slipped to reveal genuine alarm. The bracelet was never anonymously donated, Poirot announced with quiet satisfaction. It belonged to Lady Pemberton herself, part of her late husband's collection. Someone discovered its extraordinary value and conceived a plan not merely to steal it, but to profit from its theft while maintaining their position of trust and respectability. At that moment, young Ashford, who had been growing increasingly agitated, suddenly excused himself, claiming a headache. Minutes later, a distinct clatter echoed from the library, followed by his muffled exclamation. Poirot rose swiftly. "Ah, it seems our young friend has made a discovery." We found Ashford pale and trembling beside a toppled bookcase, scattered volumes revealing a small ornate locket containing a miniature portrait of Miss Hartwell. The discovery unleashed a cascade of revelations. Ashford confessed to a secret engagement with Miss Hartwell, their desperate need for funds to escape her aunt's disapproval, and their knowledge of the bracelet's true value. Miss Hartwell's careful composure finally crumbled as she admitted to photographing valuable pieces in Lady Pemberton's collection, ostensibly for insurance purposes, but actually for potential sale to unscrupulous dealers. As these personal secrets emerged, Poirot observed each reaction with increasing satisfaction. "The jade serpent has indeed revealed more than its beauty," he declared. "It has exposed a web of deception, desperation, and misguided loyalty that reaches far deeper than simple theft. Tomorrow, when the morning light provides clarity that darkness obscures, we shall see justice properly served and innocence vindicated." The morning light filtering through Lady Pemberton's study windows cast sharp shadows across the documents Poirot had arranged with characteristic precision on the mahogany desk. I found him examining a collection of correspondence, insurance records, and what appeared to be personal papers, with the methodical attention of a scholar deciphering ancient texts. His green eyes held that peculiar gleam that indicated his little gray cells were working at maximum capacity, though he maintained his customary discretion about the exact nature of his discoveries. "Hastings, mon ami," he greeted me with unusual warmth. "The morning brings clarity that darkness obscured. The jade serpent continues to whisper its secrets, and I begin to perceive the pattern that has eluded us all." He gestured toward a small leather-bound diary, which I recognized as belonging to Lady Pemberton. The pages lay open to entries from the week preceding the charity soirée, written in her distinctive hand. Inspector Japp's arrival interrupted our examination, bringing welcome news that Sir Reginald's condition had stabilized, though he remained weak from his ordeal. More significantly, the inspector confirmed Poirot's suspicions about the jade fragment. "The laboratory analysis supports your theory completely," he announced with grudging admiration. "The fragment was cut with precision instruments, not broken accidentally during theft. Someone with considerable skill deliberately created evidence to implicate Sir Reginald." Lady Pemberton appeared for breakfast, looking more fragile than ever, her episodes of confusion becoming increasingly frequent under the strain of investigation. Dr. Thornley attended her with professional concern, but I observed something desperate in his ministrations, as if he were attempting to prevent some inevitable revelation rather than simply treating her condition. The other suspects maintained their careful positions, each watching the others while attempting to appear normal. Poirot's examination of Lady Pemberton's diary revealed entries that cast the entire affair in new light. "Observe, Hastings," he said quietly, pointing to an entry dated 3 days before the soirée. Lady Pemberton writes, met with Mr. Davies from Hartley & Sons. He confirmed the Jade Bracelet is indeed genuine and quite valuable. Eleanor seems very pleased. Must remember to tell Reginald. And here, a later entry. Eleanor insists we keep the valuation quiet for now, says it might inflate expectations for the charity auction. The implications were staggering. Miss Hartwell had not merely kept the valuation secret from her aunt's guests, but had actively persuaded Lady Pemberton to conceal information about her own property. This revelation transformed our understanding of the companion's character, suggesting calculation rather than loyalty, control rather than service. More damning still was Poirot's comparison of the anonymous donation note with samples of Miss Hartwell's correspondence. He spread the documents before me with the precision of a card, sharp revealing a winning hand. The subtle peculiarities, mon ami, the hesitation in certain letter formations, the distinctive crossing of the letters T. They are identical. Miss Hartwell forged the anonymous donation note, creating the illusion that the bracelet was a gift to the charity rather than her aunt's personal property. The pattern was becoming clear with terrifying precision. Miss Hartwell, aware of her aunt's failing memory and the bracelet's immense value, had orchestrated an elaborate deception. She had arranged for authentication while hiding the results, fabricated the anonymous donation story, and positioned herself to benefit from the bracelet's disappearance while diverting suspicion to obvious suspects. Poirot's examination of physical evidence supported this psychological analysis. His magnifying glass revealed traces of green sealing wax on Miss Hartwell's desk, matching the distinctive shade used on the forged donation note. More significantly, his conversation with Graves revealed that Miss Hartwell had insisted on arranging the morning room display personally, spending considerable time alone with the bracelet before any guests arrived. She had opportunity, motive, and means, Poirot observed quietly. Her secret engagement to young Ashford created desperate need for funds, while her position as companion provided perfect access and knowledge of household routines. The theft was not impulsive, but carefully planned, with Sir Reginald selected as the ideal scapegoat due to his financial difficulties and obvious expertise in Oriental art. The morning's most significant discovery came when Poirot requested to examine Miss Hartwell's personal effects. Among her correspondence, he found a receipt from a precision instruments supplier dated 2 weeks before the soirée for the purchase of a jeweler's saw and cutting implements. Her explanation that they were intended for charity craft projects seemed increasingly hollow under Poirot's gentle but persistent questioning. As the day progressed, Miss Hartwell's composure began showing subtle cracks. Her usual efficiency seemed forced, her helpful manner strained, and I noticed her hands trembling slightly when she thought herself unobserved. The weight of Poirot's accumulated evidence was clearly taking its toll, though she maintained her facade of innocent cooperation. The overlooked detail, Hastings, Poirot confided as we prepared for the evening's final confrontation, was not physical evidence but psychological inconsistency. We sought a desperate thief acting from sudden opportunity when we should have recognized the careful planner who created that opportunity. Miss Hartwell's greatest mistake was her perfectionism. She planned too well, controlled too much, and revealed her hand through the very thoroughness that she believed would protect her. The Jade Serpent had indeed revealed its secrets, exposing not just theft, but betrayal of the deepest trust between family members. The drawing room at Belgrave Square had been transformed into something resembling a tribunal, with chairs arranged in a precise semicircle that allowed Poirot to observe every expression, every subtle reaction from his assembled audience. The evening light cast long shadows across the Persian carpet, creating an atmosphere of theatrical tension that seemed entirely appropriate for the revelations about to unfold. Lady Pemberton sat in her customary chair near the fireplace, her earlier confusion replaced by a terrible clarity as she began to understand the scope of the betrayal she had suffered. Inspector Japp positioned himself near the door with professional readiness, while the remaining suspects arranged themselves with a careful positioning of players in a deadly game who finally understood that the stakes were far higher than they had imagined. Poirot stood before the mantelpiece, his diminutive figure commanding absolute attention through sheer force of intellectual authority. His green eyes surveyed the gathering with satisfaction, and I recognized the familiar signs that indicated his little gray cells had finally assembled every piece of our complex puzzle into a pattern of devastating clarity. He held in his hands the key pieces of evidence, the jade fragment, the forged donation note, and the receipt for precision cutting tools that would prove central to his exposition. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began with characteristic formality, "we gather this evening to resolve a mystery that has cost an innocent man his health and nearly his life. What appeared to be simple theft was actually an elaborate deception designed not merely to steal valuable property, but to destroy reputations and manipulate trust in the most callous manner imaginable." His voice carried the weight of moral authority as he continued. The crime began not on the evening of the charity soiree, but weeks earlier when someone discovered the true value of Lady Pemberton's jade bracelet and conceived a plan of breathtaking audacity. He moved to examine each suspect in turn, his methodical approach building tension with surgical precision. "Mrs. Mansfield, your financial difficulties are genuine. Your admiration of the bracelet was obvious, but your hands lack the steady precision required for the delicate work we have discovered. Dr. Thornley, your telephone call to the art dealers was motivated by professional concern, not criminal intent, and your medical training, while providing steady hands, does not extend to the specialized knowledge of jade cutting required." Young Ashford shifted uncomfortably as Poirot's gaze fell upon him. "Monsieur Ashford, your debts and secret romance created desperation, but desperation alone does not create the calculating mind that orchestrated this deception. The elimination of other suspects served to focus attention inexorably upon Miss Hartwell, who maintained her composure with visible effort." Poirot produced the anonymous donation note with theatrical precision, his magnifying glass revealing details that had escaped earlier notice. This document, supposedly written by an unknown benefactor, bears handwriting characteristics that match perfectly with samples from Miss Eleanor Hartwell's correspondence. The subtle formations, the distinctive crossing of letters, the hesitation in certain strokes that suggests deception even in the act of writing. Miss Hartwell's face went ashen, but she remained silent as Poirot continued his methodical destruction of her carefully constructed deception. The theft required intimate knowledge of household routines, complete access to Lady Pemberton's affairs, and understanding of her increasing episodes of confusion. Only one person possessed all these advantages while simultaneously having motive for such elaborate planning. He produced the receipt for jeweler's tools with devastating effect. These precision instruments, purchased weeks before the soiree, were not intended for innocent craft projects, but for the deliberate creation of false evidence. The jade fragment provided the most damning proof. This piece was not broken during hasty theft, but cut with surgical precision to create tangible evidence against Sir Reginald Blackwood. The choice of scapegoat was calculated, selecting a man whose financial difficulties and expertise in Oriental art would make his guilt seem inevitable to investigating authorities. As Poirot's evidence mounted, Miss Hartwell's composure began showing subtle cracks. Her breathing became labored, her hands trembled slightly, and her usual efficiency seemed forced and desperate. The weight of accumulated proof was clearly taking its toll, though she maintained her facade of innocent cooperation with visible effort. "But you made one crucial error, mademoiselle," Poirot said quietly, his tone almost gentle despite the devastating nature of his accusation. "Your perfectionism betrayed you. The crime was planned too carefully, the evidence too conveniently placed, the timing too precise. A desperate thief acts from impulse, but your actions showed the methodical calculation of someone who had studied every detail." The climactic moment arrived when Poirot approached the morning room display. "We have searched everywhere for the missing bracelet, yet Jade is superstitious. It prefers familiar surroundings. Consider the vanity of a thief who lingered to admire her prize, who believed herself to have created art from crime. Would such a person bury her treasure where her eyes could never visit it?" He pressed gently upon the velvet cushion, and the fabric yielded with a faint creak. The seam underneath is new, the stitching expert but hurried. Our serpent has been sleeping where it first displayed its beauty, inside the pillow of its own pedestal. Miss Hartwell's collapse was complete and sudden. The efficient companion dissolved into a trembling woman whose careful facade could no longer conceal her guilt. "I never meant for Sir Reginald to be hurt," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I thought the evidence would simply point away from the family." Lady Pemberton's heartbroken question, "Eleanor, how could you?" seemed to complete the destruction of her companion's defenses, revealing the depth of betrayal that had transformed trust into calculated deception. The silence that followed Poirot's revelation about the cushion was profound and terrible, broken only by the soft whisper of fabric as he pressed gently upon the velvet surface to reveal the telltale give of altered stuffing beneath. Lady Pemberton's sharp intake of breath seemed to echo through the drawing-room as Inspector Japp moved forward with professional efficiency, producing a small knife to carefully open the seam that Poirot's keen eyes had detected. The jade serpent emerged from its hiding place like a creature awakening from enchanted sleep, its lustrous green surface catching the lamplight with an almost malevolent gleam that seemed to mock the elaborate deception that had surrounded its disappearance. Miss Eleanor Hartwell's composure, maintained with such desperate determination throughout the investigation, finally shattered completely at the sight of her carefully concealed prize restored to the light. She sank into the nearest chair with a broken sob, her efficient facade crumbling to reveal the frightened, desperate woman beneath. The transformation was startling in its completeness, as if the removal of the bracelet from its hiding place had simultaneously stripped away every pretense and defense she had constructed around her guilt. "I never intended for Sir Reginald to be hurt," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling of the fire. "I thought the evidence would simply point away from the family, that the investigation would conclude quickly without anyone being seriously harmed." Her confession poured forth with the desperate relief of someone who had carried an unbearable burden for too long, revealing the meticulous planning that had preceded the charity soiree by several weeks. The engagement to Timothy Ashford, conducted in secret for nearly 2 years, had created a pressure that gradually eroded her moral foundations as his gambling debts mounted beyond any reasonable hope of repayment. When she discovered the jade bracelet's extraordinary value through her management of Lady Pemberton's insurance correspondence, the temptation had proved overwhelming. The anonymous donation note was her creation, forged with careful attention to disguising her handwriting, designed to remove the bracelet from her aunt's personal possession and create a context where its theft would seem less directly connected to the household. The planning was extensive, she admitted, her professional competence reasserting itself even in confession. "I researched jade cutting techniques, purchased the necessary tools, and studied every aspect of the household routine to identify the perfect opportunity. The charity soiree provided ideal cover, with multiple suspects present and the natural confusion of a social gathering to mask my movements. The fragment found in the Chinese vase had been cut that very morning while Lady Pemberton rested, using the jeweler's saw she had acquired weeks earlier under the pretense of charity craft projects. Her method of concealment had been ingenious in its audacious simplicity. During her arrangement of the morning room display, she had carefully opened the cushion's seam, removed sufficient stuffing to create a hollow space, and prepared the hiding place where the bracelet would rest literally beneath itself. Her years of managing household repairs had provided the sewing skills necessary to reseal the cushion so expertly that the alteration remained invisible to casual observation. Lady Pemberton's reaction to these revelations was perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of the entire affair. The betrayal by someone she had trusted implicitly, treated as family, and relied upon for every aspect of her daily management seemed to age her visibly as the confession continued. "Eleanor," she said quietly, her voice trembling with hurt rather than anger, "I would have given you anything you needed. You had only to ask. How could you believe that I would value jewelry more than your happiness?" Young Ashford's horror at discovering his fiancée's crimes was genuine and complete, his earlier relief at being cleared of suspicion transforming into anguish as he realized that his romantic pressure and financial irresponsibility had driven the woman he loved to such desperate measures. Dr. Thornley's professional assessment provided crucial context, explaining how Lady Pemberton's episodes of confusion had created opportunities for manipulation that a less scrupulous companion might exploit. Poirot's satisfaction at solving the mystery was tempered by genuine sadness at the human cost of the crime. "The psychological pressure I applied throughout the investigation," he explained to Inspector Japp, "was carefully calculated to exploit Miss Hartwell's perfectionist nature. Each mention of forensic techniques, each casual observation about evidence patterns, was designed to increase her anxiety, while preventing her from attempting to retrieve or relocate the hidden bracelet. The jade fragment that had condemned Sir Reginald bore the unmistakable marks of modern cutting tools, evidence that would have eventually cleared him, even without Poirot's intervention. The borrowed wrap that had created false scent evidence, the carefully timed closing of the morning room door, the exploitation of Lady Pemberton's memory difficulties. Every element revealed a calculating mind that had orchestrated deception with ruthless efficiency. As Inspector Japp formally arrested Miss Hartwell, her final request was that Timothy Ashford be told she had meant to spare him knowledge of her methods. The young man's choked response spoke volumes about the destruction of trust and love that extended far beyond the simple theft of valuable jewelry. Poirot's final observation, delivered with characteristic gentleness as order was restored to Lady Pemberton's drawing room, captured the essential tragedy of the case. "The jade serpent has indeed revealed its secrets, mes amis, exposing not merely theft, but the corruption of trust between those who should have been bound by affection and loyalty. Justice returns, though the heart suffers greatly for it." The silence that settled over Belgrave Square following Miss Hartwell's departure possessed the peculiar quality of a storm's aftermath, when the air itself seems to exhale relief, while simultaneously mourning what has been lost. Lady Pemberton remained motionless in her chair long after Inspector Japp's footsteps had faded from the marble entrance hall, her gaze fixed upon the jade bracelet that lay coiled upon its velvet cushion like a serpent that had finally shed its malevolent skin. The weight of betrayal pressed upon the drawing-room's elegant atmosphere, transforming what had once been a sanctuary of refined society into something resembling a place of mourning. Dr. Thornley's professional ministrations provided necessary comfort, though his earlier concerns about Lady Pemberton's memory difficulties now seemed less medical condition than cruel exploitation. "The episodes of confusion," he confided quietly to Poirot, "were genuine, but not as severe as Miss Hartwell led us to believe. She systematically exaggerated her employer's vulnerability to justify her increasing control over household affairs. The revelation added another layer of calculated manipulation to Eleanor's crimes, showing how she had weaponized compassion itself. Young Timothy Ashford's anguish proved perhaps the most painful to witness, his earlier relief at being cleared of suspicion transformed into the deeper agony of recognizing his own role in driving the woman he loved to such desperate measures. His stammered apologies to Lady Pemberton carried the weight of genuine remorse, though both understood that his gambling debts had provided the initial pressure that corrupted Eleanor's moral foundation. "I shall sell everything," he promised with trembling voice. "The motor car, the flat, everything necessary to settle my obligations honestly." Mrs. Mansfield's departure brought with it a quiet dignity that spoke volumes about the difference between poverty honestly borne and wealth obtained through betrayal. Her final words to Lady Pemberton, spoken with hand pressed gently to the older woman's shoulder, carried more healing than any elaborate apology could have provided. The other guests dispersed with subdued farewells, their relief at being cleared tempered by sobering recognition of how easily circumstances might have cast suspicion upon any of them. Poirot spent considerable time examining the psychological architecture of Miss Hartwell's crime, his little grey cells working to extract every possible lesson from the complex web of deception we had unraveled. "The tragedy, Hastings," he observed, while studying the jade serpent one final time, "is not that Miss Hartwell chose crime, but that she possessed the intelligence and opportunity to achieve her goals through honest means, had she trusted in human kindness rather than relying upon elaborate deception." His analysis revealed how Eleanor had gradually isolated Lady Pemberton from other confidants, subtly discouraged independent verification of her management decisions, and created an atmosphere of dependence that made questioning her judgment seem almost disloyal. The forged donation note represented perhaps the most psychologically revealing aspect, allowing her to transform theft into something resembling charitable work in her own mind. Lady Pemberton's recovery of emotional equilibrium would require time, but her fundamental strength of character remained intact. "The bracelet has served its purpose," she announced with quiet dignity, "though not as we intended. It shall go to auction as planned, but the proceeds will establish a fund for victims of fraud and betrayal. Beauty should serve healing, not harbor deception." Sir Reginald Blackwood's exoneration proceeded with appropriate ceremony, though the damage to his health and reputation would require months to heal completely. Inspector Japp personally delivered the official apology, ensuring that the circumstances of the false arrest received proper attention from his superiors. Lady Blackwood's recovery from her nervous collapse would similarly require careful medical attention and time. As we prepared to depart Belgrave Square, Poirot paused in the doorway where so much drama had unfolded, his keen eyes surveying the restored order with characteristic satisfaction. "Justice has been served, mon ami, though not without considerable cost to innocent parties. The jade serpent has indeed revealed its secrets, exposing not merely theft, but the corruption that occurs when trust is systematically violated over extended periods." The morning light filtering through the tall windows cast sharp shadows across the Persian carpet, creating patterns that seemed to speak of clarity emerging from confusion. Graves moved efficiently through the room, restoring perfect order to furniture and ornaments, his professional dignity intact despite the household's recent trauma. "Come, Hastings," Poirot said finally, adjusting his hat with characteristic precision. "There is excellent chocolate waiting at Whitehaven Mansions, and a world that, for today at least, consents to be properly arranged." His satisfaction was complete but tempered by recognition of the human cost that solving mysteries inevitably exacts. The case of the Jade Bracelet would remain among Poirot's most psychologically complex investigations, demonstrating once again that the human heart contains mysteries far more intricate than any locked room or ingenious alibi. As our taxi pulled away from Belgrave Square, I reflected that while justice had been served and order restored, the true victory lay in preventing an innocent man's destruction and exposing the dangerous corruption of trust that had festered beneath society's elegant surface. The familiar sanctuary of Poirot's sitting room at Whitehaven Mansions provided a welcome refuge from the emotional tempest we had weathered at Belgrave Square, its geometric precision and meticulous order serving as balm to minds that had been forced to contemplate the darker recesses of human nature. The afternoon light filtered through perfectly aligned curtains, casting orderly shadows across furniture arranged with mathematical precision, while Poirot moved with characteristic deliberation to prepare his excellent chocolate, each gesture calculated to restore the harmony that crime had temporarily disrupted. News of our various protagonists arrived in fragments over the following days, stitched together from Inspector Japp's official reports Lady Pemberton's gracious correspondence, and the whispered intelligence that flows through London's better drawing rooms like water through carefully tended gardens. Sir Reginald Blackwood, I was relieved to learn, would recover completely from his ordeal, though his physicians recommended a prolonged convalescence by the seaside, far from committee rooms where tongues might wag without charity. Lady Blackwood, freed from the terror of disgrace that had so tormented her nervous disposition, discovered within herself a steelier fibre than her fluttering hands had suggested, declaring with newfound resolve that no vase would ever again stand unexamined within her vicinity. Young Timothy Ashford, profoundly sobered by witnessing the consequences of his romantic foolishness and financial irresponsibility, sold his motor car and the racing pictures that had adorned his bachelor quarters, accepting with surprising maturity a junior position in his father's shipping offices where ledgers frown more sternly than croupiers ever could. The transformation from dissolute young gentleman to responsible businessman would require time and continued effort, but the foundation for genuine reform had been properly laid. Mrs. Victoria Mansfield, whose dignity and poverty had impressed me from our first encounter, received a private letter from Lady Pemberton inviting her to oversee the new charitable fund that would be established with proceeds from the Jade Bracelet's auction. The appointment promised both financial security and restoration of the self-respect that circumstances had temporarily obscured, allowing her natural grace to flourish once more in appropriate surroundings. Dr. Thornley, caught between professional duty and personal affection throughout our investigation, submitted a carefully worded affidavit that made plain how Miss Hartwell had systematically exaggerated certain symptoms and intercepted medical consultations to maintain her position of control. His offer to attend Lady Pemberton without fee until her complete recovery demonstrated the integrity that had initially aroused Poirot's professional respect. "Tell me, Hastings," Poirot inquired as he settled into his customary chair with perfectly prepared chocolate, "what strikes you most forcibly about the psychology that drove Miss Eleanor Hartwell to such elaborate deception?" I confessed that her transformation from trusted companion to calculating criminal seemed almost incomprehensible, given her years of apparent devotion to Lady Pemberton's welfare and her obvious intelligence and capability. Poirot nodded thoughtfully, his green eyes reflecting the satisfaction of a mind that had successfully penetrated to the heart of human complexity. The tragedy, mon ami, lies not in sudden corruption, but in the gradual erosion of moral foundation under pressures that accumulated over many months. Miss Hartwell did not awaken one morning and decide to become a thief. Rather, she found herself trapped between competing loyalties and chose deception over honest confession of her difficulties. His analysis revealed how small compromises had led inevitably to larger ones, how the legitimate management of household affairs had gradually transformed into manipulation and exploitation, until the line between devoted service and calculated abuse had become invisible to Eleanor herself. The forged donation note represented perhaps the most psychologically revealing aspect, allowing her to transform theft into something resembling charitable work in her own troubled conscience. But there is something else, Hastings, that makes this case particularly significant, Poirot continued, rising to adjust a slightly askew ornament with characteristic precision. It demonstrates how the methods of detection must evolve to match the sophistication of modern crime. Miss Hartwell was neither desperate burglar nor creature of sudden passion, but an intelligent, educated woman who used her position of trust to commit crimes requiring weeks of planning and considerable psychological manipulation. The Jade Serpent itself had served as more than mere stolen property, becoming instead a catalyst that revealed hidden tensions and secrets within Lady Pemberton's social circle. Each suspect's reaction to its disappearance had illuminated aspects of character that might otherwise have remained forever concealed, exposing the complex web of financial pressure, romantic desperation, and social anxiety that exists beneath society's polished surface. The resolution brings justice, certainly, Poirot reflected, his fingers steepled in contemplation. but at considerable cost to all involved parties. Sir Reginald's health may recover, but his reputation bears permanent scars. Lady Pemberton has regained her property, but lost something more precious in her trust in human nature. Young Ashford has learned painful lessons about the consequences of irresponsible behavior, while Eleanor faces imprisonment and the destruction of everything she believed she was protecting. As evening shadows lengthened across the precisely arranged room, I found myself contemplating the broader implications of what we had witnessed. The case had revealed how easily bonds of trust and affection could be corrupted when subjected to sufficient pressure, how intelligence and education provided no immunity against moral failure, and how the very qualities that made someone an excellent companion could be perverted to criminal purposes. "Yet there is hope as well, mon ami," Poirot observed, as if reading my melancholy thoughts. Lady Pemberton's decision to auction the bracelet for charity demonstrates that beauty can indeed serve healing rather than harboring deception. The jade serpent will find new purpose in supporting victims of fraud and betrayal, its ancient beauty transformed from source of temptation into instrument of justice. The irony was not lost on either of us that an object which had caused such elaborate deception would ultimately serve to combat the very crimes it had inspired. As I prepared to depart for my club and dinner, Poirot remained in his chair, contemplating the geometric patterns of his carpet with the profound satisfaction of a man who had successfully restored order to a fundamentally disordered world. "The little grey cells, Hastings," he said with characteristic precision, straightening his waistcoat with a final, definitive gesture. "They are content tonight. Justice has been served, truth has been revealed, and once again the serpent of deception has been forced to release its venomous hold upon innocent victims. Order, mon ami, has been restored to its proper place, and the world, however briefly, consents to be reasonable."